Hello, everyone. Welcome back. The global development paradigm finds itself at a critical crossroad. Climate change is inflicting concerning repercussions on developing nations and the most vulnerable communities, and threatens reversing the development gains these nations have made until date. It is now imperative that we address the urgent need to combating the escalating forces of global warming and climate change while striving to achieve the SDGs. The interconnectedness of these issues is undeniable. Addressing climate change is not only essential for achieving SDGs, but also vital for building climate resilience and mitigation efforts. As we approach the midterm review of the Sustainable Development Goals in September 2023, recognizing the intersectionality of climate change and the SDGs is key to developing effective solutions to both the challenges. ORF is pleased to collaborate with DASRA, a strategic philanthropy organization, on a joint publication to demystify the intersectionality of climate change in India. The report, titled Our Uncommon Future, Intersectionality of Climate Change and SDGs in the Global South, spotlight the need to approach climate change with an intersectional lens, which will help in devising suitable interventions and identify measures that can help policymakers ensure synergy between climate change and the respective SDGs. Lighthouse cases and learnings from India present approaches to adaptation and resilience building across some of the development sectors against climate risk, record best practices, and analyze how these approaches can be scaled up globally as well as domestically. To discuss in reality our common futures, what would it be, the intersectionality of climate change and SDGs in the Global South, I have a stellar roundup of panelists here. Hi, so I'll come straight to you, Neera, first. We have released the report. Can you set the context on what motivated DASRA to explore the intersection of climate and SDGs through this report? And what role, you have been working very closely with the CSOs. So what role do you see India's vibrant civil society organizations playing in building community resilience?
So first of all, Aparna, I wanted to really thank ORF in joining hands with DASRA and be willing and brave enough to actually venture down this path. To be honest, we've never been part of the G20 as DASRA, let alone something like the T20. And we used to joke around at DASRA saying, why be a think tank? Why think in a tank? And so we're really happy that ORF has broken out of the tank. And the reason I say that is DASRA, we started about 24 years ago. It means enlightened giving. We're a nonprofit, all for India, based in India, despite my accent. And really our focus was, can we provide and support nonprofits on the ground? Can we invest in the communities they're working with and strengthen them institutionally? And then we realized very quickly you needed resources to be able to help them grow into powerful and impactful institutions. And so on one side of our work, we work with philanthropists, with families, with building domestic philanthropy and business leaders. And on the other hand, really working with nonprofits. And for many years, we've been trying to really look at how do you build collaboratives and how do you build collaboration. And we created giving circles to support nonprofits, but now recognize that there's a need for platforms and networks. But the way funding was typically coming in, even if you look at the SDG framework, is funders come in either in education or in health, and very much sectoral. And we started collaboratives to create these pooled funds so you could get mixed kind of money. So basically, long story short, we found that very few philanthropists are interested in funding climate. And they couldn't really see the connection between climate and ultimately development. And so what we were very keen to embark on with you as ORF was really to put out there, what is the intersectionality of a fancy word, for what is the link between climate and development goals? And I think we embarked really in this report to try to show how investing in climate with an SDG lens can be a really powerful tool for philanthropy to come in, but also to really really start to engage the government. And we saw this sort of G20 and this T20 platform as a way to begin to engage government. And can there be a role both for philanthropy and policy to come into climate? Because typically this investment in climate in India and around the world has either been a global north narrative or has been very much a mitigation narrative, but also a mitigation investment. And what we've really seen being very close to the most vulnerable is that climate is affecting them the most. And so communities, to your question about what's the role of civil society, what we started to hear from our partners, and I'm so excited, Aparna, that you were willing to take the risk, if one can call it that, and have both women as well as representing, civil society, amazing organizations, that we've been working with to really speak to the role that climate is playing in these communities. So what we started to hear was that civil society wasn't feeling ready to respond to the climate needs of communities. Communities are asking, especially with a gender lens or a lens around health or agriculture. So we started to see different sectors where chunks of money was moving, that was there some sort of role we could play as building capacity, but also building a community of organizations. So I know I've sort of jumped around in different places, but I think just to leave with the role of intersectionality. So how is climate linked to specific SDGs is what we're really excited that this report starts to unveil. And really important intersections such as climate and health and climate and gender and climate in cities, which we'll hear about. The other second thing is really looking at adaptation as core to unlocking philanthropy and really engaging policy and government on the issue of adaptation, because can we make communities resilient and the most vulnerable resilient to the impact of climate? And then maybe if there's time, I'd love to talk about how there is sort of this lopsided financing, how also there's an element of this elitism in the climate discourse that we really want to break that. And then finally, I wanted to just end on what we're most excited is that the G20 is here, it's going to go to Brazil, then to South Africa, that there's a South by South role here that we really hope that this sort of report will begin to ignite.
Thank you so much, Neera. Lee, I turn to you now. International cooperation and partnerships play a very important role in supporting developing countries to achieve the SDGs while addressing climate change. What role do you think can international cooperations and partnership play in promoting the essential technology transfer, capacity building, and financial support to aid in this effort?
Thank you very much. I didn't have time to read the report yet, and I just listened to what you just highlighted. So the point for the source cooperation you just mentioned here. And I'm going to, while I was sitting there for the first panel, and I watched my mobile phone, and this heavy raining ongoing in Beijing, and I have ever seen myself that the heavy rain actually put into a really flood, and the cars floating in the river in Beijing, not in the some far area. So this reminded me the issue was just what the chair asked me, and I like to respond very quickly and shortly, in the sense that we have in terms of the tension between the climate change and development, we have pay a great attention on the North and the South cooperation. So a large amount of effort has been made on the negotiations, on the issues of how developed country should compensate, and how the technologies and the management and everything for mitigate climate risk could be actually shared to the developing countries. So that is very important. I'm not going to reject the argument. I'm not going to say it's not important. It's still important in North-South cooperation, but we need really recognize the importance of the South-South cooperation within the framework of international cooperation. And we should not, I'm not going to say South-South cooperation will replace the North-South cooperation in this area. But I have to really argue that we should not regard South-South cooperation is only in the supplementary element, and we should take as an essentially important one that because the conditions for the all southern countries, they share a lot of similarities in this field, and also look for a lot of applied technology and developing experiences that will not only build kind of what I call the applied adaptation resilience. We need to look for this adaptive resilience, not talk about the climate resilience. We need looking for institutionals, and that is one area, not only technically, but and also politically. This can reduce the risk since increasing, this increasing tensions, south and the north and developing, and within this kind of a new geopolitical situation. So in summary, I'm not going to elaborate more, but in summary, I would say let's really take South-South cooperation is the area where we have to give a different weight, and we need to look very differently in terms of building this climate resilient society. Thank you very much for this.
Thank you, Lee. Great intervention. After discussing cooperation and partnership, we need to understand what systems we need to cooperate for and what is in greater need of building resilience. Pratna, Ramesh, I would come to you. How cities will evolve, right, will determine and decide the contours of our battle against climate change. And they are one of the most vulnerable systems to climate change, and at the same time is the system that's going to host majority of world population by 2050. What do you think are the shifts required at the intersection of the cities as a system and climate to enable the systemic transformation, particularly towards improving the quality of life for the most vulnerable people living in the cities?
Thank you, and thank you for having me. So in 2021, just about 2 years ago, 1/3 of India lived in cities, right? And this number is going to increase drastically over the next decade. These cities occupy just 3% of land, contribute about 60% to the GDP, expected to increase to 75% by 2031. But the top 5 cities in India also contribute to about 10% of overall emissions in the country. Heat waves across North India, flooding in Chennai, Bombay, in my home city of Bangalore, Lisa just mentioned Beijing. It's becoming commonplace, almost as if it's an expected event in a year. With that backdrop, cities will determine how the climate action game is won or lost, and therefore needs to have that intersection at the, with climate action as well as the Sustainable Development Goals. With that as the background, we believe at Janagraha that a systems-based approach to climate action will strengthen sectoral work in climate. And therefore, we believe that 3 pillars specifically, governance, and we define governance through a city systems approach. It has 4 wings: urban planning and design, urban capacities and resources, empowered and legitimate political representation, and transparency, accountability, and participation. Fixing this will enable a robust multi-level governance system to enable greater climate action, right? All of the climate action that currently is happening across the country is focused on great symptoms to solve for, but doesn't focus on root causes. And that's the shift we have to make in governance to enable it. The second part of governance that has remained a focus area for me specifically is localization of the Sustainable Development Goals. It's very limited right now, and nor are there any capacities at the 3rd tier or the local government to enable it. But with adaptation, the most nearest form of governance that exists is the local government, and to change the narrative, we will need to build better capacities in the 3rd tier of government. The second area of focus, the second pillar for us, is financing. And while financing has been spoken about even in the last session and is the larger theme, What we particularly care about are municipal finances and being able to build capacities to use those municipal finances well. Right now, the budgets are being put out. There's no format that captures how much spending is going into climate. There's no green tagging of any level that's done, despite several municipal corporations having huge budgets. The idea is to change that narrative, to start thinking and start prioritizing based on financing. But the lag in this is that currently ULBs or city governments do not have the ability to decide where that money goes, nor the capabilities to work on it side by side to enable that is the second pillar of focus. And the third is participation. Citizen participation in climate through institutionalized platforms rather than one-off movements that we are seeing across the world right now. Giving citizens a platform to constructively engage on themes that actually matter will provide a larger convening of folks who actually care and therefore are able to participate at a greater level. We believe that while Mission Life is a great start to this on individual action, for us this goes beyond individual action to say that if we give citizens enough platforms, they are able to contribute more on adaptation as well as look at climate more deeply, right? On the side of the citizens, the last elected representative is a councillor, and the idea is to ensure that they are trained and empowered to make decisions on climate action more effectively. Like I said earlier, we believe that this will strengthen the foundational elements and therefore give a greater urge to sectoral folks who are working on climate and will act as a great boost in general to effective climate action across the country. And thank you.
Thank you, Pratna. Your last point really brought me to the most important part of the conversation, participation and about community. The question, and the most important question, is whose resilience are we building, right? The communities, which are essentially women and youth, play a huge role in transforming the systems. Vijay Datta, I would come to you first. Youth have been, the IPCC has recognized the young and children to be particularly vulnerable to the impact of climate change. But at the same time, youth is playing a significant role in bringing awareness, bringing technological solutions in our fight against climate change and addressing some of its biggest impact, right? How can we put the youth, according to you, at the center of creating a community-led movement for climate action?
Thank you, Aparna. Greetings, everyone. It's indeed a privilege to be present in this August gathering where everyone's got so much of technical knowledge on the subject. Well, I've come from Delhi where it was awfully hot and floods knocking at our door. The schools were shut, first because of the extreme heat and then because of the floods. You must be all aware, Yamuna is flooded and our schools have been closed for more than 4 days in a row, and 6 in total already a week we have suffered. So this climate change that we have been talking about, the global warming, has actually become a global boiling now. It has assumed a proportion which is catastrophic, and it is kind of a climatic apocalypse, if I may call it. We have been at it, but we need to get more practical about the knowledge that we have gathered over the years, the consequences that we have seen. Like I just said, it has become to global boiling. It has come to that. I, as an educator, has had the chance to interact both with the private and public sectors over the period, and now as an administrator who looks primarily after a big campus in the heart of the capital, which I pride on year after year, gets the Green Award for having maintained it too well. But I go out to IPSC, the Indian Public Conclaves. I'm part of the Round Square Conclave, which is a global body which has countries all over the world, and we are making some attempts, some little baby steps, if I would say. Baby steps, I think, goes well with the fact that we deal with students. Well, I feel very earnestly. So far, the students are kind of neglected. They are the future. We always say that. We are very clear that they are the future and they are going to suffer the most. The next generation and generations to come, they will be fearing, they will be facing the catastrophic consequences of how, at what rate the global warming is taking place. Therefore, I very sincerely believe that the student engagement in such conferences and at all global conferences should be much more. They have a lot of ideas and they do a lot of things on ground. Not that they are not aware about the fossil fuels, about the landfills. All these facts are being taught. I also sit on the CBSC curriculum committee. We have included SDGs. They are very much part of the curriculum. Children are aware of the 17 SDGs. And what interests us most is the 4.7, which is education for sustainable development and global citizenship. The sustainable lifestyle it talks about, which is to be environmental friendly. And lifestyle changes, I believe, can maximum happen with the students. For them to understand how it can make a change, they can go home, they will go home and tell their parents, educate the parents that, look, the use of LED bulbs is better. Solar energy is to be used. Why can't we have those panels on the terrace? And coming from youth and children, I'm sure it would have a big impact. Well, how can we instead put the youth at the center, like you just said, Aparna? Engagement at all levels, I feel, is very important. And we do a lot of things in the school, like the tree plantation. We started a drive with a school in UK recently in which we vouched that we would have trees planted all over the world. And 5,000 mark is what these students have recorded so far. They must have more voice in the entire grand scheme of things, as we say. The circular economy is taught to them. I have also recommended to the CBSC that things a little more technical. If they know, it would only benefit, and it is going to be a very practical thing. The reuse, the regeneration, the 4 R's that we talk about, if they go home and tell their parents that, no, I don't want to buy another new mobile, I don't want to go for a new bicycle, a bike, because any production, you know, has a consequence. There is carbon emission in any production that happens. We must reuse as much as we can for the discarded material. The discarded food, for example, creates methane, a gas which is a greenhouse gas and is very harmful. So a simple thing like this, that eat the food as much you want on the plate, don't throw it away, because discarded food will lead to the generation of methane, a gas which is a greenhouse gas. Now, when you talk about food, when it's transported, when it is grown, at every level there is emission. The greenhouse gases are produced at every level. So a simple thing like food, we must focus on, use as much we want, take on our plate as much we need, and not to throw it away. There are many things. The biodiversity is part of the curriculum, where we teach how every organism is important. And clean energy, the use of clean energy, the use of renewable energy, the solar, the wind, the geothermal, everything leads to a greener world. And it is not about just the countries. Let's not, like Tagore said, think from the narrow domestic walls. Let's think from a broader perspective. Long time ago, Tagore said, about the narrow domestic walls, you would relate really well with that. So it's about the world. We have to be thinking about the world, and in whichever manner, without thinking that how a developed country or a developing country should be doing in particular, each one should make one's best food. Maximum effort, if I may say. In our schools, we do a lot of things. Yeah. We have debates, we have so many elocutions on environment. All that will, I'm sure, go to a long, long way. The mentorship, the networking that the children learn at schools goes a long way. Like I was talking about the Round Square Conclave, which is an international body, and children get to interact. Even during the COVID, they were virtually connected, and wherever possible, we know we must go virtual. So virtually they were connected, and they did their bit. I'm sure they would continue to do so.
Thank you. I'll just want to come to Uttara Narayan very quickly in the interest of time. Please keep your intervention short. But one of the most disheartening thing that we know, and I feel very depressed to say that over again, that how much climate change disproportionately and adversely affect women. And at the same time, I have seen them as the faces of resilience and nature-based solutions, and the pioneering and the solutions that they are pioneering on ground to build community resilience against climate change. My question to you is that you work very closely with them as a CSO. So how have you seen this reality of disproportionate impact on women manifest itself in your organization's close work with women? And how can gender intentional approach address some of these challenges? I like the second question better, but over.
Thank you. Namaskara, everybody. 12 years back, when I started Buzz Women as an organization working at the grassroots serving women, my idea of being a cost accountant came from a very economic perspective. I also went in thinking about livelihoods, economics, how can financial management, capacity built around it can better the empowerment around women. 5 years back, the women sort of pushed back themselves and said, all this is great, but there's much more happening in our lives. And even before I knew the word intersectionality, the reality hit me, and the women hit me with the reality. Climate change is not just about climate change. It has a gendered, socio-economic, and cultural context to it. And we need to see it from a very decentralized perspective. As much as there is a macro systemic angle to it, there is also the micro everyday perspective coming from a woman's life. We serve 4.5 lakh, which is 450,000 women in 10,000 villages in Karnataka. Also in 4 other geographies, Gambia, Tanzania, Georgia. And what we find is that in every place, climate change has an impact, but it has a different symptom that comes out. Let me quickly give you a story, just to give you a perspective of how it affects a woman's life in an everyday. Think of Lakshmi, 28-year-old, has 6 people in her family, in-laws, husband, 2 children. She has 2 acres of land. And they have been surviving on those 2 acres and a cow and some poultry in their backyard for years together. But for the past 5 years, there have been unprecedented rain. They always had a pattern that this month you sow, this month you harvest. There are a few months where you let it lay barren. And then the cycle would continue. But because of this unprecedented rain that has been happening, there has been crop loss. So what happens when there is crop loss? Health gets affected because there is less food in the family. And when there is less food in the family, the woman eats last, given the cultural context. The male eats, the children eat, and then the women eat. Because of which there are health consequences that have been happening. There are low levels of water. Even though there is unprecedented rain, it is not getting collected. It is not going into the groundwater the way it's supposed to go because of the changes in the way that roads are being made, the houses are getting built. When there is less water, women are again struggling because they are responsible for managing water. There are villages where they have to walk sometimes 3 kilometers to actually fetch water because their own well has dried up. There is also stress because of the debt. When there is crop failure, which means you've taken a debt. And then there is stress within the family, which also results in violence because there is no other outlet for that stress right now. One of the things that has also happened is use of fertilizers because they want to increase the crop yield, right? If there is crop failure, which means the next cycle you want to increase the yield, because of which there are health consequences that have happened. And all this, you might say, are like individual issues in silos. There is a water issue, there is a fertilizer issue, there is a chemical issue, there might be a debt issue. But if you look at it holistically, it is all connected. So that's where the intersectionality comes in. And in all of this, a woman is getting affected because in her day-to-day life, she has to manage all these elements along with her family, but much more because she is taking care of the food at home, taking care of the water requirements at home. She is also managing the stress levels at home. The mental health is getting affected. So if you ask me, the work that we've seen the past 5 years that has had like tremendous impact on the women, but in all this, she has the least decision-making power. So that's where it affects the most, because not just at home, but also at the community level. Because if you realize water is a community resource, soil is also a community resource, and the community is not coming together in a participatory way to build resilience, because everybody has started thinking of it as, oh, it's that farmer's problem, or it is that village's problem. So how can we bring it all together is the work that we are trying to do. We are trying to engage with communities to build the resilience where they sit together and have that conversation. As a community, yes, there is a big requirement of thinking of it at a macro perspective, but at every community level, and we have seen that there are positive results that come out of it. When communities sit together and also acknowledge that, yes, there is a problem, and also that we are part of the problem. I feel one of the steps for all of us here is also that we have caused this problem. It's not just that it is climate change, climate didn't come up with it. We are part of that problem, we have created it, and the moment we take responsibility for it, which is what the women end up doing, because they have got the vocabulary now to understand, so what does this mean? What are the actions that I have taken, my community has taken, which has resulted in this? And what changes can I make? So also important to know that we need to change the narrative from women and communities being victims to being the potential for change, that they have enough potential to take charge of the solutions also in their own communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'll now open the stage for a very quick rapid fire because we have only 9 minutes left, and then I'll give 5 minutes for the audience to pose questions. So because we are sitting at Think 20, right? Each of you should think from a G20 perspective, being, say, G20 representatives, and tell us two or one that crisp point of recommendation on how policymakers can approach climate change with an intersectional lens that will help in developing suitable interventions across the development sector. I will start with you, Uttara. We'll go from here and we'll end with the right thing.
Thank you. I think one of the things to do is let communities take charge. I feel a lot of macro level decisions being made are not going well because they have been thought out in a scenario which cannot apply to every single context. So we need to let communities take charge and have community level resilience built.
Rapid fire in one line.
Yeah, 3 very quick points. Okay. One is to reduce fragmentation because climate as a theme is very fragmented across the global south. Second is to provide institutionalized platforms for participation. And the third is to learn from each other, the global south that we were speaking about, because I think that revolution will help clarify a lot of problems.
I have 2 things. One, we've launched Climate Rise, which is a platform of 100 different civil society organizations. So hopefully the G20 and others can come to really see the needs and work with the needs of the community. And the second is let's innovate on the role of philanthropy. I think philanthropy can take a lot more risk. I know the other panel talked about first loss guarantees. So can we inspire philanthropists to unlock more to really fill some of this climate funding gap?
Well, in the interest of time, I'll keep it very brief. Number 1 point, what I would like to say is allow children to take lead in the policy measures, in the policy making, give them more space. And secondly, I would request the governments to support in ensuring minimal learning losses that the children are facing currently. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you very much. I like to call for the attention from G20 leaders to recognize two urgencies. One is that urgency for SDG. It's no matter any way that we have to wait. Second one, for the urgency of climate change. Further, the intersectionality between the SDG and climate change should be given further attention by leaders to go beyond. All leaders should really see how to go beyond this geopolitics to look for our common interest and the common benefits for the global, society. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I now open the floor for any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Dan Bannick, a professor from the University of Oslo, Norway. I've really enjoyed the discussion so far. But one common theme, I think, Neera, you began with this, that the climate discourse is often very elitist. And I hear this in many global forums, that the global south, the so-called global south, views these problems very differently from the global north, and I do sympathize. In Scandinavia, for example, there's a lot of flight shaming, which doesn't resonate very much with my colleagues in Africa. So there are many of these issues, apart from the fact that perhaps poverty reduction does not get the kind of focus in the global north, apart from the fact that rich countries should be shouldering most of the responsibilities, finance more of these programs. What else would you highlight? Xiaoyin, you talked about South-South cooperation. What aspect, what would you like on the global agenda that you think is being neglected, that you feel deserves greater attention in the climate discourse? Thank you.
Neera, would you like to take that question?
I mean, I think it's coming from the challenges where we were saying that it's not community-led. And I think some of the ways that are in this climate narrative are very large numbers, and very much it feels like it doesn't actually affect at an individual level. And so I think the need to strengthen institutions to respond to climate, and the need to respond individuals to recognize that they need to start demanding, but at the intersection, because people, I guess, in the communities that we work with are not willing to compromise their aspirations. And I think that's a bit different in the global south, right? So when some of the climate conversation ends up being very much linked to energy access, that needs to change, right? So let's invest in gender, let's invest in health. I think that might unlock a lot more willingness to participate. But I think it's also the same problem in the global north. Everyone's not running around in the global north thinking this is a problem that they want to deal with. I think the purpose of this panel and the research was to say that the most vulnerable communities in the global south are actually impacted in a way that isn't getting enough visibility, that can we build a demand side, but can the government also respond in a way? But there's also a role for the private sector to play. And there's a role for all of us in our aspirations. Back to, what Vijay was saying, I think the challenge that happens on the development side is we start saying, women shouldn't want washing machines. Young people shouldn't migrate to cities. So I think just rethinking some of the circular economy, the aspirations impact will be important for us, definitely in India, given our demographic dividend as well.
Thank you. Man in the back.
Yeah. My question is to Vijay, sir. Sir, is sustainability is the responsibility of current generations or the future generations? Because as we know, the sustainability is too important for the development of the country. So as a next generation, I am just asking with you, you are the current generation of the country. So is it with your hands or in my hands? So this is the question of mine.
Well, it's for both, I would say. We are dealing with it, and they are going to be suffering or benefiting from whatever the benefit is. That is why I just said that they should be engaged even more, so that whatever they sow, they reap. That is what I would say. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I have space for one last question.
Hi, I'm Viola D'Souza from Manipal University. So universal health coverage has revolutionized global health and has improved health of the most vulnerable through the concept of health for all. So my question is, can we learn lessons from UHC and apply to climate change to drive commitment to this crisis?
Thanks. I do not have a direct answer to that, but definitely some learnings from health as a sector, as well as the plan that you were speaking about, could be transplanted into climate. However, I think the most important part about that is the intersectionality, right? The health intersection with climate, the health intersection with vulnerability, and most of these plans do not account for those intersectionalities today because they're led as an bureaucratic mechanism of each department, each ministry by itself. As long as we're able to take care of the aspect of it, some learnings can definitely be transplanted. However, it requires a different approach because climate is more interrelated, more complicated than the issue of health today.
My follow-up question is, Neera ma'am's one of the strategy was to say like the philanthropy can be a part of, like they can play a part in it. How about have a partnership where academic, philanthropy, government, private, all can come together and solve the issue, or at least suggest some solution?
I mean, I agree with you, yes. I think part of it is linked to that much of this narrative and discourse. It's not not everyone's invited to the table. And I think what is exciting about this research, or even this T20, and even aspects of the G20 being in the South, is that it is more inviting of these kinds of stakeholders to come and be part of solving the challenge of climate as it relates to the most vulnerable. Ultimately, it will have to be participatory, and it'll have to be communities asking for it. But we need to educate philanthropy. We need to make people more aware. We need to do research to try to understand what is the link to climate and health. And I think to your earlier question, the challenge in climate and health is strengthening systems. If systems can be strengthened to respond to what climate places for the most vulnerable, or all of us, then that's sort of one step in building our resilience.
Do you want to have
I just wanted to add to what Pratna said about the healthcare system. I guess the infrastructure readiness is also important, right? In the healthcare system, that has happened with the universal healthcare. The same has to come to climate as well. Infrastructure is not ready in a lot of places. One of the things is, farmers are not getting to know reliable climate information and weather forecasts. And without that, you can't build resilience if you are hit by surprises every single week. So I feel infrastructure readiness is something that at a macro level that can be worked on.
Thank you so much. Great panel, and thank you for keeping the discussions very crisp. I'd now like to end the session with this, and let's have a photo together. Thank you.